Well, the stars are out for our award show tonight, our mid-season awards. Grab a seat, grab a drink, and join us on the Locked On Nebraska podcast.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, good morning. It's an award show in the morning, by the way. Thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And tonight's lovely, lovely show is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started.
All right, welcome in. I am your host for the evening or the morning, Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor Happer.
Great.
My co-host is here from 1620 The Zone in Omaha. We are making our way through the bye week. And today, Connor, we're going to look back at the first half of this football season and look ahead to the second half. We've got predictions. We've got awards. We've got superlatives. We've got all kinds of stuff. No rules. There are no rules, except this. You can only pick a player once. Each person can only pick a player once. In theory, I could have the same player as you in a different category.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. That's it. That's the only rule.
Now, look, I've gotten as the co-host this morning, I have gotten a sneak peek at at some of the names that we'll be mentioning tonight. I don't think there is one single repeat name on this list.
And that's the way it's supposed to be. We would like to hand out as much hardware as we possibly can, as many trophies as we possibly can. I don't know what you get for winning one of these awards. That's to be determined at a later date. Maybe someday we'll have an award show and we'll have an actual name for the awards. But why would we not start with anything other than the midseason MVP of the Nebraska football team? That is the biggest award. That is the award that goes to the player, as the name would suggest, who is the most valuable part of this team, the player who Nebraska could not do without. And I can see that you went with the very easy choice.
Yeah, what? I wasn't going to pick him for any other category. I think that Dylan Raiola is Nebraska's best player. He's their most impactful player. They couldn't do what they're doing right now without him, which is have a 5-1 start with limited turnovers and kind of mistakes. He's been everything that Nebraska fans have expected and more. He's thrown for almost 1,400 yards, 9 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. You carry that over an entire year. I mean, we're talking about basically 3,000 yards, almost 20 touchdowns, and less than 10 interceptions. Maybe those numbers will grow in the second half of the season. That is everything I could have expected out of a freshman quarterback. He's exceeded those expectations, and I think he's led the charge in a lot of ways too, as we've discussed on this show plenty. Dylan Raiola is my first half MVP. Easy.
I don't sense that you're going to get a lot of argument from people in the state of Nebraska after watching the freshman quarterback for the first 6 games. I am approaching this a bit differently. I think the heart and soul of a good Big Ten team is in the trenches. So I went scouring along the offensive and the defensive line for somebody who's leading the way, somebody who's going above and beyond. And I pulled Ty Robinson out of that stack. I think he has been even more than what Nebraska thought it was going to get when he decided to come back. Somewhat surprisingly, remember back before the Iowa game last year, right around the Wisconsin game, when Ty Robinson walked to the podium in the media room at the Hawks Center and said, "I'm coming back. We're going to run this thing back. I want to go another year. Forget the NFL. It can wait." And people maybe scratched their heads a bit and thought, okay, well, are we going to see a different kind of Ty Robinson? Because that great player, that dominant defensive lineman, I think we've seen it in the past in just like little bits and pieces. We're seeing it this year every game, just about. I don't know if we saw it a lot against Illinois, but just about every game, we're seeing a guy who is one of the best defensive linemen in the Big Ten. So leading Nebraska, is he leading Nebraska in sacks? I should have these stats in front of me. I believe he has 4 sacks, and he's right at the top of the defensive charts. I'll check that out while you're going through the next category. But Ty Robinson is my guy. I think he's been the heart and soul of this team, the heart and soul of this defense, and the defense is still leading the way, even with young Dylan at QB.
All right, on to the next category, Mitch. Let's go to the unsung hero of the first half, the person that people don't talk about enough and should be talking about more, and is key to Nebraska's success. Your winner of this award is?
It is the envelope, please. It goes to Gunnar Gatula, the redshirt freshman left tackle for Nebraska, who stepped in and has played the most consistent left tackle that Nebraska's had. He's given Nebraska its most consistent play at left tackle since when Teddy Prohaska was young at this position. I think when Turner Corcoran has played the spots, there have always been games or moments here and there that have made you long for him to be at a position that was more natural for him. Gunnar Gatula looks like a natural at left tackle from what we've seen so far. Now, has Dylan taken some hits from the defense since Gunnar has stepped in there? Yeah, he has. And I don't know that they're necessarily Gatula's fault. His number one job as a left tackle is to be the primary protector of that QB. But I think he's doing a nice job for Nebraska and unsung in the sense that not a lot of people are seeing him and paying attention to having to pay attention to what he's doing.
Yeah, it was definitely. I mean, we talked about lack of tackle depth all throughout preseason camp, and it was just like, well, if they lose a guy here, then you're going to be in big trouble. They lost a guy, and they're not in big trouble. So you got to give Gunnar Gatula his props on that one. I'm going to take another low-hanging fruit here for my unsung hero, and I will take John Bullock. I think he's been Nebraska's best defender. I mean, you had Ty Robinson for midseason defensive in team MVP. I think John Bullock is he might have finished third in that category if we had the votes tallied up in front of us. I mean, John Bullock has been super impactful. He's had a huge say in a whole bunch of gigantic plays this year, including one that we're going to talk about here in just a second, where he was a literal unsung hero of a play that we're about to talk about. And, a pick six, a splash play in the Purdue game. John Bullock, even though people talk about him and now we know that he's one of the anchors of this defense, I still don't think it's enough. What he's done this year has been phenomenal.
Yep. Ty Robinson, by the way, is the co-leader with James Williams in sacks at 4 for this team in 2024. Okay, the next category is the best moment of the first half. And would you like me to unveil my pick first?
I would.
Okay. I'm going with Tommy Hill and his pick six against Shedeur Sanders in the Colorado game. That, to me, was the signature play in that game. I think that will be one of the signature plays, if not the signature play from this entire season. The only reason that I wouldn't just say it's a slam dunk in that category is because that was week 2 and it didn't come in the Big Ten, and Nebraska has big ideas and big plans to do things in the Big Ten, and something might unseat that happens here in the second half. But right now, to me, that's the moment that speaks to what this team can be, because we've seen what this team struggles with in various halves of just about every game. And then there was that first half of the Colorado game when Nebraska looked like a top 10 team and raced out to a 28-0 lead and played with all of the intensity and energy that any fan could want and wish for. And I think Tommy Hill was right at the heart of that with that pick when it was 7-0 to make it 14-0 and Memorial Stadium just erupted. It was a moment that we'll remember for a long time.
So I'm gonna award the award here on my side to the same play. I don't think there's a better pick for this, but I was trying to think of some others that could be thrown into this category, and I don't think any of them are there. But what I came up with was another moment in that Colorado game, which was Ramir Johnson's tip catch. That ended up scoring a touchdown. It was sort of just a moment where it's like, oh, wow, yeah, it's going Nebraska's way tonight. That should have been intercepted, and it ended up being a touchdown. That doesn't happen very often. That's kind of when you knew, all right, it's going to be a very, very good night for Nebraska. How about John Bullock's pick six that we just mentioned? That's a good one. And then, you know what? There's nothing. Now, there could have been several from the Illinois game had Nebraska won that game, including Isaiah Nayer's pretty miraculous touchdown in the short corner of the end zone. But I even think back to that first game I believe it's a 59-yard touchdown pass to Isaiah Nair, and Dylan Raiola said, I'm here. It was kind of a welcome type of moment. So those would be my finalists, but I think you made the right pick with the pick six.
That was electric in the sense that it was it wasn't about the opponent, but it was about the participants. And you had Nair, who was the heralded wide receiver transfer from Texas, big, long, athletic, and then of course Dylan delivering that ball, and Isaiah broke through some tackles. Yeah, that was quite a moment, just because of who it involved. The one that got away, the one that could have been a moment, is Raiola on third and three, and just missing Luke Lindenmeyer in the end zone for what probably would have been a touchdown to put away Illinois in the final minutes. And then overtime, it never would have happened, Connor, and we wouldn't have been having those discussions for a week about what happens when the overtime arrives at Nebraska. We wouldn't have our bet that's hanging out there about when Nebraska will again go to overtime and if it will get a first down. So
long term. Yeah.
We are going to keep this thing going after the break with some more picks. We've got breakout player, we've got coaching MVPs, we've got surprises of the first half to get to. That's all coming up next when we're back at the Locked On Nebraska podcast.
But first, it's time for here for the FanDuel Sportsbook. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. You don't have to be an NFL fan, by the way, but you should be an NFL fan because it's awesome.
Should be.
We got college football. We got baseball playoffs. Heck, even the NBA is starting up. If you're disgusting sicko, the NBA is starting up for you. FanDuel's got it for you. Head to FanDuel.com right now. And new customers, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. The live betting options are awesome as well. You could really have it all on the FanDuel Sportsbook. So visit FanDuel.com today. FanDuel.com, $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Okay, good evening again. Good afternoon, good morning, whenever you might be watching this, watching or listening to, like you said, this podcast. We're your hosts, Connor Happer and Mitch Sherman. And we have some more awards to give away from Nebraska's first 6 games of the year, in which they are 5-1. One of the things, let's can we take a quick unplanned detour real quick?
Always. I love unplanned detours.
So we know that Nebraska is going to play on Big Noon against Indiana.
That's worth noting.
I wonder what time they'll play against Ohio State. I wonder what time they'll play against USC, which has been rumored to be a very, very, very late night kickoff on the West Coast on occasion this year. We could predict kickoff times, or maybe that's a tomorrow episode or something like that.
I think I'd like to think about that a little bit.
Yeah.
I think I'd like to put that one in the fire and do some research, look at the games on the schedule in those weeks, because that often is a factor. But I think it's a great conversation, because you got Big Noon for Indiana, like you said. Is that going to be the A crew? Are they getting Gus and Joel?
I would think so. Yeah.
I mean, why would Gus and Joel need to see Indiana? There's no doubt about that. So probably not Big Noon for Nebraska, Ohio State. You wouldn't think, but I'm interested. I'm intrigued. I would like to know. I'm more curious about the USC game, because that would be really late. If it's late there, it would be. I mean, you could be looking at. Remember that Fresno game from many years ago that started at like 9:30 Central Time? Like, that's not going to happen. They're not going to do that with Nebraska USC, I don't think, on November 16th. But anything's kind of up in the air. I mean, it's not going to be a 9:00 in the morning Pacific start. So anything other than that, I think, is on the table.
It'll be interesting to watch for that week, because there is a slot that has a late game for that week. There's also there's a late game that is on the West Coast that weekend, which is on a Friday. The UCLA Washington game is on the Friday for the Nebraska USC week. There's also Oregon and Wisconsin for that week, and maybe not a whole lot else. So that, once again, that's a detour. We can have it at some other point as we look ahead to the second half. But let's continue to look back at the first half. Our biggest surprise of the first half. Now, this could be an abstract thing. It could be a person, but it also could be like a thing that has happened, or a trend with the team, or an event, whatever it might be. Mitch, where does your brain go here on the biggest surprise of the first half?
Yeah, my brain went to an unexpected place. And it's hard to say this is the biggest surprise of the first half, but it's something that I thought we were going to see this year because of some of the coaching shifts on the offensive side for Nebraska, with Marcus Satterfield handing off the quarterbacks to Glenn Thomas, and then Sat went over and took charge of the tight ends. And I looked at that tight end room with Fedoni and with Borkercher, and I kind of still look at Carter Nelson as a tight end, even though he's a wide receiver. And I thought this was going to be a big year for Nebraska and its tight ends. I thought this was a year where you'd see tight ends flashing open in the end zone because teams had to pay attention to what Nebraska was bringing on those corner and fade routes, and Dylan would have a great time throwing to his tight ends and scoring touchdowns, and they have yet to do that. Fedoni had 5 touchdown catches a year ago. He almost got his first one against Rutgers, but it did not happen. He's been held out of the end zone. He's caught 3rd or 4th most passes on the team, but my surprise is that Nebraska hasn't gotten more in the receiving game out of its tight ends.
I'd say it's a pretty good surprise. I was expecting a lot more from that position. I was expecting some of the wide receivers to open some things up for those tight ends in the middle of the field as well. And
maybe it'll still happen.
Maybe it'll still happen, but most of that tight end usage has been kind of out near the boundary, which has been even more.
It's kind of odd.
Interesting. Yeah. My surprise of the first half is this, and like this was a thing that could have happened in like your plan A for how the season's going to go. If you're trying to map out Nebraska going like 9-3 or 10-2 or something like this, it would have worked out exactly this way in this category. That Nebraska amazingly has almost completely eliminated their years-long, decades-long turnover issue. I mean, overnight. It took one guy to do it. It took Dylan Raiola to make it happen. Nebraska has turned the ball over 4 times in their first 6 games. They're on pace to turn it over, and 3 of those were interceptions, and one of them was a fumble in the first game. And 2 interceptions were stolen away by other players that could have been conceivably catches, and in one case, a touchdown catch. It's amazing how they've done this, and they have retained their explosiveness on offense. It's not like they're just sitting on the football trying to just keep it away from the other team. They're allowing Dylan Raiola to make plays with the football in a general sense as well. Maybe not the second half against Rutgers, right? But they're on pace for less than 10 turnovers. Their current turnover margin is +6. I mean, in my wildest dreams, I would have said this is around the top end of where it could possibly end up for them halfway through the season.
I thought the top end was break even, was just 0 on the turnover margin. Like they were -17 last year, and I thought the best they could hope for was just to get that back to steady, and may still be the case. But through the first half of the season, they were on a pace to be a long way above that, and they've not turned it over more than once in a game. I think it's funny where Dylan has thrown 3 interceptions. And we always talk about, when you bring it up, about how I do this too, how he had 2 of the picks taken away by defensive backs. Like it wasn't his fault. And then the third one, I found myself blaming it on Ben Scott because the snap was high on the third interception. And Illinois brought a safety down into the box at the last second. And Dylan was going for a read that he thought he had pre-snap. And he wasn't able to see the safety move because he was catching the high snap and adjusting to that. So his eyes were in a different place.
So he's really got no picks.
He has no, he's going to finish his career at Nebraska with 15 picks, but none are his fault.
He's never going to throw a real interception. Can't wait. But it's off to a great start. That's for sure. On to our next category, the the midseason breakout player of the first 6 games. Mitch, who do we have?
Yeah, for me, this was kind of easy because he showed up in the summer. This was not somebody who was on our radar in the spring. Didn't even really know that Nebraska was going to be in the market to recruit a player at his position. And then when he got here, there wasn't a whole lot of talk about this player walking out and starting or contributing much in the defense. It was about, well, he's going to need to adjust. And as observers, we saw his history at his former school where he kind of walked away from things late in the season last year and then wasn't in spring. I thought it would be a slower ascension than it has been for Sierra Wright, but he has burst onto the scene in the last 3 weeks since Tommy Hill sustained a foot injury and has been, maybe the foot injury came earlier, but it's bothered him more since the Illinois game, since Nebraska got going in the Big Ten. And Sierra Wright has played at a tremendously high level to the point where when Hill comes back, maybe after the bye week, you're not going to be able to take Sierra Wright off the field.
Mm.
He's going to be out there, and maybe that means Marquise Buford plays some safety. I don't know. I would think Tommy Hill's going to be out there too. So it's great to have options. And Rhule, he used the word like 3-man rotation when he talked about it here this week. But that's it for me. LeBron James' son, Sierra Wright, is the breakout player of the first half of the season.
Sierra Wright, the actor.
Yes.
Mine was pretty easy as well. Ja'Cory Barney. He's been one of the most impactful guys on offense. He has the second most catches so far this year, and that along with his so he has 19 catches for 149 yards. It's not close to the top. It's 4th in receiving yards, but it's second most receptions because he catches a whole bunch of jet sweeps, and then he gets going in the run game as well. There's only a matter of feet on whether these are catches or whether they're runs, but he has another 104 yards on the ground. So he's got more than 250 scrimmage yards so far this year. I think he's kind of slowly but surely become like a really trusted target of Dylan Raiola. And he's out there more and more seemingly every week. Ja'Cory Barney's my midseason breakout guy.
Yeah, not making freshman mistakes is the thing that really stands out to me about Barney, other than the obvious speed and athleticism. All right, we'll buzz through the last superlative of this segment before we get to some predictions in the third segment of the show. Midseason coaching MVP, and you can't say Matt Rhule or Tony White.
I give some thought here to a guy like Glenn Thomas or Marcus Satterfield even, but I'll go defense. And I'll go with a new guy. I'll go with John Butler, where the second, really a lot of the reason you just said right there. I mean, guys like Sierra Wright coming in and making a difference almost immediately. The back end is something that we're really not concerned about no matter who goes into the game. And they've had a bit of a rotating stable at the second or third corner. Like they've been able to pretty much cover all that up. Hell, they've spent the last couple games without Tommy Hill, a guy that, the coaching staff thinks is going to be like a 1st-round draft pick. So give me John Butler, who's come in and assimilated himself pretty nicely.
Yep. I'm going with pot roast. Terrence Knighton, Nebraska's D-line coach, just continues to get it done. And we saw it last year when the D-line was one of the huge question marks going into the season. And then you felt as good about that position group coming out of the year as any on the whole team. And they've picked up where they left off and have improved in some ways. For instance, James Williams, who is apparently very close with Terrence Knighton, as we heard James talk about last week after his second consecutive 2-sack performance. So the fact that Knighton's getting this based on his body of work, he's getting it based on this year, but his body of work is a consideration. And the work that he's done both with a guy like Ty Robinson, who I had as my midseason MVP, and someone like James Williams, who came off the scout team from last season, he's able to churn out production with levels of players who come from very different ends of the spectrum.
No doubt about it. All right, that's our second segment. We still have a couple more things. We'll sort of turn the turn the prediction machine ahead or on as we look to the second half of the season and as we look beyond the second half of the season when we return on the Locked On Nebraska podcast.
All right, I want to take a minute to tell you about Gametime because it's college football season. It's the postseason in Major League Baseball. It's time to get excited about fall sports. And if you've got something, some kind of a game, a concert, an event that you'd like to see in person, Gametime will make that experience much easier. It is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. Tonight, if you're not in front of your TV, you want to go down to Kauffman Stadium. Maybe it's to drive up to Kauffman Stadium. Maybe you're listening to this show in Kansas City and you need to get out there and see the Royals Yankees in Game 3 of the American League Division Series. Get on Gametime. It makes getting tickets easier and faster. Prices on the app go down the closer you get to first pitch. Maybe not tonight in Kansas City, they won't go down, but sometimes they go down the closer you get to first pitch. Wherever you want to go, if it's a hot ticket, it's there on Gametime. I love that you can see flash deals, views from your seat, customize your spot in the stadium. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app today. Gametime, last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Okay, we're back. Final segment of this Wednesday predictions show, awards show, superlatives show. We are in the final stretch here, and we're going to turn it to a forecast. We're going to look ahead into the final 6 games of the season. Connor, you're up first to predict a second half breakthrough Husker.
Well, I'm going out on a limb here, and this requires that this person gets healthy, which we don't know about yet. And I'm talking about Tristan Alvano. If Tristan Alvano can come back for Nebraska in the second half of the season, and Rhule mentioned on Monday that he was very careful about it, but he said he's getting to the point where they're going to start testing some things. So maybe it can eventually be a go the next time Nebraska takes the field or at some point down the stretch. But they're going to need something from their kicking game. And so if Alvano can come back and just give him just the slightest amount of stability at that position, that might be enough to get Nebraska where they want to go this year. Seriously, their margins are pretty thin. So I'm almost willing this into existence. Tristan Alvano, your second half breakthrough.
Okay. I like it. I like what you're thinking there. And what would it really take for a breakthrough at the kicker spot? I mean, if he makes a 45-yard field goal there, you've pretty much locked up that award. I'm going to say Carter Nelson. I think we've seen glimpses of it in the first half. We saw glimpses of it in the first half, and you see Nebraska continuing to be eager to want to put Carter Nelson, the true freshman wide receiver, tight end turn wide receiver. You see them being aggressive with wanting to put him in different spots. I think this bye week and then the other bye week that Nebraska is going to have before the USC game are going to be really big for a player like Carter Nelson. Like, okay, you've been coaching him hard. He showed up in the summer. You got preseason camp to coach him. Now he gets 6 games of experience, and then you get to take a week and break things down and slow it down and refine what he's doing. I think he could come out next week before Nebraska goes to Indiana and be in a position to have an expanded role in that game. And for him to have another bye in the second half of the season, this is a guy who just has tremendous upside and I think an ability to grow really fast in what he's able to bring the offense. So that's my second half breakthrough prediction.
Nice pick. Let's go to an upset, a prediction for either Nebraska being upset or getting an upset in the second half.
I just saw your pick.
What we know right now.
Oh my goodness, your pick. Good for you. Good for you. I'm going to say that Nebraska upsets Iowa on a cold Friday night in November. We know when that is. It's the day after Thanksgiving. It's Black Friday. I think Iowa is going to right the ship, which is why I say upset, because right now Iowa is 3-2 and it just doesn't look all that much like Iowa. It did on that day in Minneapolis when Caleb Johnson got rolling downhill, but Iowa State didn't look like Iowa. The Ohio State game turns out to be 35-7. I get it. It's a great opponent, but Iowa has had a tendency to kind of keep these things ugly and muck them up. And that didn't happen, certainly not for 4 quarters in that game. I think Iowa, with the schedule that it has in the second half, is positioned to go on a run here. And I think when Nebraska heads into Iowa City, they're going to be sitting right back up there in that 8-9 win range. And, 9 would require them to win out from here. Iowa does not play a ranked team, a team that's currently ranked the rest of the way. So I think Iowa will be favored. And and I say upset because, man, those conditions, they're going to favor Iowa if Nebraska has any inkling at all to want to throw the football on that night. I think the Nebraska defense is going to show up, and Iowa is going to have a hard time scoring points, and it's probably going to be 14-7 like we saw last week in Lincoln.
Speaking of Nebraska's defense, I'm also taking an upset based on Nebraska's defense. I think, and we already know this, Nebraska will be an underdog when they play Indiana next weekend. And I think Nebraska's defense goes in there, gets a few takeaways, and really wins convincingly at Indiana. And, speaking of not playing anybody, Indiana has definitely been that team so far. The whole college football world is going to enjoy them. They're going to be featured on Big Noon and all these things. And Nebraska gets to play the role of the spoiler at Indiana, and they put together a really complete performance and win on the road at Indiana. That's my upset.
There are going to be some real interesting dynamics, some real interesting psychological dynamics at play in that game. Before that game, you're right. Indiana is going to be everyone in college football is going to want to talk about Indiana next week with Big Noon coming in. They're on the big stage. They're finally playing a team that they expect to get a real challenge from after all of these blowouts. Even the start of the Big Ten has been 3 convincing wins for Indiana, and Nebraska is going to have that chip on its shoulder. So Matt Rhule is going to be pushing buttons all week. In fact, he's probably already started pushing buttons about Indiana. And what do you guys think about this? Look at what they're saying out there. So yeah, I like where you're going with that. I don't know that I agree with you, but I like where you're going with it.
Thank you. You could applaud at least that I have the guts to go out there a little bit.
Yeah.
Our last award tonight. What is the number one storyline regarding Nebraska football in the month of December?
Well, the number one of the number one storylines is going to be that they're back in a bowl game, but I'm not going with that. Number one thing that I'm going to be talking about, that I think a lot of people are going to be talking about in December, is Tony White, because when the coaching carousel heats up, Tony has done nothing this year to take any of the shine off of his resume. Last year, he was up for a number of jobs, and this year, he's going to get one. He's going to be one of the first coordinators, if not the first coordinator in the country, who is plucked for a head coaching job. And I think he might get one in the Power 4. So if that happens, and I expect that it will, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the 2 years that Tony White spent at Nebraska, who he is, what he's taken to some other school, and what Nebraska is going to do to keep that defensive mojo going. Probably going to promote somebody from within. It might be the guy that you talked about as the midseason coaching MVP.
Aside, of course, from Nebraska preparing for its Duke's Mayo Bowl appearance or its ReliaQuest Bowl appearance.
You got him getting bowl eligible next week, man.
Yeah, I mean that's up there. Citrus Bowl, the Cheez-It Citrus Bowl. Who knows? That'll be up there a little bit. Let's go outside of that, and let's say that I think we will be talking pretty intently about Nebraska's pursuit of top running backs and wide receivers in the transfer portal. I think they will have an example of an entire season of Dylan Raiola to sell to people, and there will be talented wide receivers and running backs out there. I was going to say just running backs at first, because I know that that's a position that they want to address and that they want to have a home run hitter there. But then I thought, well, they're going to lose a couple wide receivers as well, who've played a lot of minutes for them. Like, I think Nebraska is going to be a pretty good destination for players who are really talented and established in college football, if they're in the transfer portal, to come in and play a season or two with Dylan Raiola. That'll be what we're talking about in December.
Yeah. you can bet that Nebraska is going to be looking. They've got a commitment from Jamarian Parker, who was a pretty big time running back out of high school in the St. Louis area. But they're going to want experience. They're going to want experienced receivers. And, there's some guys who are redshirting this year, some young receivers in the program, but Nebraska's had such success going out and finding experienced players at that position that I think they're going to be back, and there's going to be urgency to do that with Raiola headed into his second year. All right, that's it for this Wednesday edition of Locked On Nebraska. Thank you for making us your first listen today. Now go check out the Locked On College Football Podcast. Make that your second listen. Spencer McLaughlin has everything you need to get through week 7 of an exciting season. Find the link to his show, to that show, in the description of this show. No need to search. All of it is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.